Tonight, something big is happening far above the Arctic Circle, and it has nothing to do with polar bears or melting ice. It's about power, not military bases, not missiles, but tiny metallic elements hidden in a lonely Alaskan mountain that could shake China's grip on the global tech industry. We're talking about a new discovery at the Graphite Creek deposit in Alaska, officially the largest known graphite deposit in the United States, where scientists have now confirmed the presence of rare earth elements, including the superstar of modern technology, neodymium. If you've never heard of Graphite Creek, get used to the name, because you'll be hearing it a lot. The project, run by Graphite One in western Alaska, near Nome, was already classified as the biggest natural graphite resource in the U.S. and among the largest in the world, with a feasibility study that tripled previous resource estimates. The plan is a 20-year mine that would produce around 175,000 tons of graphite per year from just about 12% of a 15-kilometer mineralized trend. That alone was a huge deal for batteries, electric vehicles, and national security. But then came the bombshell. New analysis of garnet-rich rock inside the future pit shows elevated levels of the most coveted permanent magnet rare earths: neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, terbium, and samarium, plus scandium and yttrium. In plain English, the U.S. just found, in one single Arctic deposit, two categories of materials that the Pentagon officially classifies as critical to national defense: graphite and rare earth elements. The project's CEO called Graphite Creek a truly generational deposit, and he's not exaggerating. If they can economically recover those rare earths as a byproduct of graphite mining, you suddenly have an American mine feeding both the battery economy and the magnet economy out of the same hole in the ground. To understand how big this is, you have to understand what we're really fighting over. Rare earth elements are the quiet backbone of modern civilization. They sit inside your smartphone, your hard drive, your flat-screen TV. They're in the motors of electric vehicles, in the generators of wind turbines, in fiber optic networks, in lasers, in advanced sensors. They're embedded in guidance systems, submarines, fighter jets, radars, and drones. And the most important ones for this story are the magnet rare earths, the ones that make those super strong permanent magnets that drive high-efficiency motors and high-end military hardware. Now here's the problem. For decades, China quietly built a near monopoly over this invisible infrastructure. Depending on how you count it, Beijing controls roughly 70% of global rare earth mining and around 90% of rare earth processing and magnet manufacturing. On graphite, the picture is just as bad, if not worse. China supplies about 80% of the world's graphite and was a major source for 1/3 of U.S. imports, when the U.S. was 100% import dependent. And Beijing knows exactly what it's holding. In the last few years, China has repeatedly tightened export controls on critical minerals, first on certain rare earths, then on gallium and germanium, then on graphite, then on magnet-related rare earth elements. Each time, Western factories got a brutal reminder of how vulnerable they are. A report cited by CNBC and a CSIC study bluntly warned that the U.S. is unable to replace China's rare earth supply in the short term, and that these export controls pose a direct threat to U.S. defense readiness. Another analysis described America's situation as an unfathomable national security bind because China can simply choke off minerals essential to jets, missiles, and advanced electronics. So when Fox News says this Arctic discovery could deliver a massive blow to Chinese dominance, what they're really talking about is leverage, about turning a one-sided dependence into a two-way game. Their reporting notes that as of 2024, the U.S. was more than 90% import dependent on both rare earths and graphite, while China previously accounted for about 90% of production of the relevant materials. Plug a domestic, Pentagon-backed deposit into that equation and the math changes. Not overnight, but it changes. And this deposit isn't just a science project. Graphite One already completed a Pentagon-supported feasibility study more than a year ahead of schedule, backed by tens of millions of dollars in Defense Production Act funding, and even has a provisional export credit deal lined up for hundreds of millions more in financing. The idea is to build a fully integrated American supply chain. Mine in Alaska, ship ore via the port of Nome, process it into advanced graphite and battery anode materials at a plant in Ohio, and even add a recycling facility to recover graphite and other battery metals. Now, with rare earths in the rock, that same chain might also feed magnet materials into U.S. industry. But before we crown this as game over for China, let's slow down and talk about scale and time. Because that's where things get complicated, and that's why this story is so important. First, demand. The International Energy Agency has warned that demand for battery graphite alone could be more than 20 times higher by 2040 compared to 2020 levels. On magnets, EVs, wind turbines, and defense all want the same rare earths, and the world is nowhere near meeting that future demand from non-Chinese sources. Even if Graphite Creek becomes a major producer, it's one big node in a much bigger network that still has to be built. Processors, magnet plants, downstream factories. Second, time. Turning a discovery into a functioning mine is slow and painful. One analysis quoted in the industry press estimates that, in the U.S., the average time from discovery to production for a new mine is nearly 30 years, among the slowest timelines in the world. Graphite 1 is ahead of many projects, but we're still looking at a ramp-up that runs through the late 2020s and into the 2030s before full production. In other words, this is not a next quarter story, it's a next decade story. Third, costs and trade-offs. Mining rare earths and graphite is dirty work. Environmental law experts and geologists have highlighted that expanding mining brings deforestation, water contamination, and waste problems, and that pushing for resource independence has environmental and social costs that someone will absorb, often local and indigenous communities. So the question for the U.S. is not just can we mine, but can we mine fast, clean, and politically sustainable enough to actually replace dependence on China? Now zoom out from Alaska and look at the global chessboard. At the diplomatic level, you can see a rare earth arms race unfolding in real time. After years of tensions, the U.S. and China recently agreed to a one-year deal in which Beijing maintains rare earth exports under a special understanding reached between President Trump and President Xi in South Korea. Basically, a temporary truce in the mineral war. At the same time, Canada is leading a G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance to pool resources and reduce dependence on Chinese supply, while the U.S. and Australia just signed an $8.5 billion critical minerals pact to ramp up non-Chinese production. So you've got diplomacy buying time, while new mines like Graphite Creek try to come online. Beijing, meanwhile, is still using export controls as a scalpel, halting shipments of rare earth magnets to specific Western companies and forcing them to scramble, as reported by CNN and others. This is an economic weapon that hits exactly where modern economies are most vulnerable, at the heart of green tech, AI hardware, high-end manufacturing, and advanced weapons systems. And then there's a wild card that shifts the playing field entirely. What if we don't need rare earths for magnets at all? While China tightened its chokehold, American researchers at the University of Minnesota were working on something radically different: magnets made from iron nitride, a compound built from two of the most common elements on Earth, iron and nitrogen. A U.S. startup called Niron Magnetics is now trying to commercialize this breakthrough, claiming its iron nitride magnets can match or even beat the performance of rare earth magnets, using no rare earths at all. Backed by big automakers and U.S. government funding, they're building a plant in Minnesota targeting about 3% of U.S. magnet demand by 2027. A Fox News opinion piece framed it bluntly. China weaponized science by investing for decades to control rare earths, but iron nitride is the key element they missed, an innovation that no one can monopolize as long as America has iron ore and air. That might be optimistic, but the point is clear. The West isn't only fighting back with mines, it's also fighting back with new physics. So what does all of this mean when you put it together? The Arctic discovery, the shaky export deals, the G7 Mineral Alliance, the US-Australia Pact, the iron nitride revolution. It means the era where China could single-handedly decide who gets the materials for electric cars. Advanced missiles and AI servers is starting to be challenged from multiple angles at once. Alaska's Graphite Creek deposit is one piece of that push, a physically massive Pentagon-backed project that combines graphite and rare earths in a single U.S. deposit at the exact moment China is using, both as geopolitical leverage. Iron nitride magnets are another piece. Beijing, meanwhile, is still using export controls as a scalpel, halting shipments of rare earth magnets to specific Western companies and forcing them to scramble, as reported by CNN and others. A bet that the best way to beat a monopoly is to make the product itself obsolete. Diplomatic deals are a third, a way to stop the bleeding while alternatives scale up. But here's the catch, and this is where I want your opinion in the comments. None of this guarantees victory. Mines can be delayed. New technologies can fail to scale. Politics can shift. China can undercut prices to keep competitors unprofitable, just like it did when it built its monopoly in the first place. And demand for these materials is exploding so fast that even with Graphite Creek, Canada's alliance, Australia's mines, and new magnet tech, the world could still be stuck in a structural shortage. So when you hear headlines like "massive blow to Chinese dominance," ask yourself, is this a knockout punch or the first real counterpunch in a much longer fight? Is the US finally building the strategic patience China showed for decades? Or are we celebrating too early because we love a good victory story? Let me know what you think. Is this Arctic discovery the beginning of the end for China's rare earth monopoly? Will iron nitride magnets and similar innovations make the whole rare earth race irrelevant in 20 years? Or are we just moving from one dependency to another, this time on our own environment and on massive state subsidies? If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like the video so the algorithm actually shows it to people, and share it with someone who still thinks rare earths are a sci-fi concept. And as always, this channel isn't here to tell you what to think. It's here to give you enough information so you can argue about it in the comments with facts, not just vibes.